Welcome back to the Own It podcast. My name's Dion, and in today's episode, we'll be discussing all things material facts, everything you need to know as a buyer to give yourself or to minimize your chances of making a mistake. When I say that, it's because material facts, what are they? Well, material facts is pretty much anything that you need to be made aware of as a potential buyer on a property. Vendors and real estate agents are legally required to inform you as a buyer of anything that could deter your enjoyment of purchasing a property. I think one of the easiest ways to explain what material facts are to give a couple of examples because the legislation is so grey. So let's say you purchase a property and you decide you wanted to put a deck at the back of the property and you never got a permit for it. That is technically considered a material fact. Even if it's been 10, 15 years, if you never got a permit for that deck, you have to disclose that to the buyer. Another one, for example, is any major crimes committed at a property. So just a fun story for everyone. It's not really that fun, but when I was an agent, I was helping sell a property. It wasn't a property I listed, but I was helping sell one that had previously been a crop house, right? The owner that was selling it had it tenanted out and the tenants were using it for purposes they shouldn't have been using it for. And it got raided by the police. And then the vendor decided to sell it because they had insurance works, et cetera, et cetera. Long story. We had to disclose that to every potential buyer. Another example was during that campaign, a buyer did a building and pest inspection and found out there were live termites at that property. Then we found out of that and we had to disclose that to every buyer that went through the property. This property used to be a crop house and it does have active live termites. Those two things would influence buyers' decisions, and that's why we had to let them know. Another example was we had a property listed. There was a tenant in the property. They wanted to purchase that property because the owner was going to sell it. They actually facilitated a building and pest inspection without us knowing because they were residing at the property. And that building and pest inspection came back with major structural defects. They then sent that report to us and we found out that there were major structural defects. And because of that, we had to disclose that to every party. We actually did our due diligence. We worked out how much that would cost to facilitate works to get it back to a safe structural condition. And we just passed on all that information to buyers. So in short, a material fact is anything that may influence your decision to purchase a property. So why is it important to ask? Vendors and real estate agents are obligated to disclose anything they're aware of to you as a buyer, right? A vendor has to disclose anything they're aware of to the real estate agent to inform you. But sometimes vendors won't because they're not aware of what they are. So there's also an onus on the real estate agent to educate the vendor on what material facts are. Ignorance is not an excuse for not knowing what material facts are as a vendor or as an agent. They have a responsibility to understand what it is and disclose it to you. Now, they actually have to disclose it to you without you even asking. If you look at the legislation, it clearly states that you have to make buyers aware of anything that may impact their decision. So practically, what does that look like? They should be putting it into a contract of sale. It should be clearly stated in there. So there's a record of it, a written record, but they also need to announce it at any auction they facilitate, especially if it's public, right? Because as we discussed on a previous episode, you don't need to register to bid. Anyone can come along and bid at any time. So you need to disclose it publicly at the auction, and you need to let any buyer that has a reasonable amount of interest, you need to let them know as an agent. So there's multiple points that they need to disclose this. In saying that, as I said before, I will come across so many agents still that do not understand what material facts are. Should they? 100%. They absolutely should. But I still have to educate them as a buyer's agent on what they are. So it's always best to send an email to the agent or a text message to the agent asking what material facts are. Because if they're not aware of what they are, then they just won't disclose it to you. And you might be there as a buyer thinking there mustn't be any material facts because the agent hasn't disclosed anything to me, but they're just not aware of what they are. So that's why it's so important you put it in writing to them so you've got a written record. What constitutes as a material fact is still kind of up in the air for debate, right? But I think it's super clear. Anything that could impact your decision to purchase a property should just be disclosed. And if you're a buyer, you just have to sometimes ask, are there any material facts? And then specifically ask other questions. Is there any works at the property that don't have permits? Has there been any crimes? Has anyone passed away at the property? Sometimes you have to break that question down even further just to make sure. Like anything, we would always suggest consulting an expert. So if you have further questions about material facts, I would suggest getting legal advice in and around this. And in the upcoming episodes next week and moving forward, we're going to get some professionals on in some specific industries. So if you have questions on finance or contracts or building and pest inspections, then please send them through to info@marsdenbuyersagents.com.au and we can answer all these questions for you. We look forward to hearing from you and we'll catch you in next week's episode.